Veronica stood on the platform for a long time, seeing off her friends with whom she was studying at the university. Amanda and Stephanie were heading to New York after their summer vacation. They were going to start their sophomore year studying economics. Veronica, on the other hand, was studying to be a teacher, but due to extenuating circumstances, she was forced to stay behind for another day. This fact upset the young woman greatly and caused her a despondent mood. Well, I'll have to go alone, and my friends will be having fun on campus in the meantime, Veronica thought with a hint of envy. The train station platform had its own indescribable atmosphere. Some people were leaving, some people were arriving, while others still were seeing off their friends and relatives. However, in all that chaos, there was one more group of people which most travelers treated with a fair dose of contempt. Those were the homeless people. Veronica had long gotten used to the fact that people got divided into rich and poor, but to openly beg for money on the street, it was something unthinkable to her. It was one thing when an old, degrading person was begging for alms, and something very different when it was a young, healthy man. Veronica looked at the stranger with an outstretched hand with obvious distrust. At first glance, it seemed that the man's age hardly exceeded her own. Unlike most homeless people, this young man behaved modestly and didn't yell at the passers-by, hoping to get the coveted dollar. Instead, the man stood quietly on the platform and politely asked if anyone would lend him some money for a ticket to New York. That's something new. They usually beg for money for food or drink, but for a train ticket? Veronica thought without taking her eyes off the homeless man. The man wasn't exactly successful in getting the money. He probably should have been bolder and should have asked for more than the amount he originally voiced, and also looked less embarrassed when doing so. At some point, Veronica started feeling sorry for this man, who didn't try to come up with some heartwarming story, but instead simply asked for money for a ticket. "Do you really need to go to New York?" the woman asked in a stern voice. The man looked up at her in surprise and, embarrassed by his unenviable position, replied, "Yes, my name is Floyd, and I really need to get to New York." "Well, if that's the case, I'll buy you a ticket, but there's no way I'm giving you the money. And also, don't think that you can return the ticket for cash," Veronica said, and once again was surprised by the man's calm reaction. Floyd didn't look the least bit upset or disappointed. Apparently, he really wanted to get to New York. Veronica smiled slightly and went to the ticket office, where she bought him one ticket to New York. Then, after thinking for a second or two, the woman went to the nearby food stand. Assuming that the man was probably hungry, she bought him some buns and a bottle of soda. "Here, this is your ticket, and here's a bite to eat for you to take on the road. The train ride will take a while," Veronica said, a little embarrassed, and handed the man a bag of provision. "Thanks a lot. I will definitely pay you back. What's your name? How can I find you?" Floyd said. "My name is Veronica, and that's it. I don't give out my home address to strangers, especially homeless strangers from the train station. Goodbye, and have a safe journey, Floyd," the woman replied. The young man was reluctant to say goodbye, but having shown the ticket to the ticket inspector, got on the train. Veronica waited for the train to leave and went home. As she was leaving, she could feel Floyd's gaze on her for a long time. The woman was thinking about her own life. Veronica was going on the same trip the next day, to New York, the city of her dreams. In the meantime, she was heading home to pack her bags and prepare for the upcoming trip. Of course, Veronica assumed that she would never see Floyd again. Time flew by, rushing through the sheets of the tear-off calendar. 20 years have passed since that memorable encounter to the platform. Veronica graduated from the university and had been working as an English teacher in one of the schools in New York for several years. She never returned to her hometown in northern Ohio, determined to make her dream come true. In New York, she met a man named Anthony, who later became her husband. The young people stayed together for only 5 years, during which they never managed to get used to each other. To Veronica's great disappointment, Anthony turned out to be very different from the kind of man he tried to come off as when they first met. By virtue of his nature, the man was secretive and rarely shared any information about his work with his wife. Anthony stayed late at the office, never feeling to come up with a plausible excuse for it. Veronica had repeatedly found lipstick stains on his shirts, but she was afraid to confront her husband about it. Instead, the woman chose to believe her husband's stories that he had stained his shirt during informal business negotiations. This went on until it turned out that Anthony hadn't been paying off his debt for several months, but instead was spending money on his countless mistresses. Upon learning the truth, Veronica finally confronted her husband, and the ensuing argument resulted in him leaving her. And it all could have been fine if only the mortgage loan wasn't taken out in Veronica's name. In the several months that her husband hadn't been making the loan payments, the overdue amount with interest became huge. Veronica's modest salary didn't allow her to pay off the debt in one payment, and therefore, at the behest of her cunning spouse, she found herself in a very difficult situation. Of course, the woman tried to borrow money from her friends, but none of them could provide even a third of the required amount. What am I supposed to do now? It's such a shame. They will soon evict me, and the school will immediately find out about it. How will I be able to look my students in the eyes and their parents? Veronica whispered with tears in her eyes. The thought worried the unfortunate woman so much that she couldn't sleep or even think straight. Having failed to find a way out of her predicament, Veronica decided to go to the bank where they took out the loan. On her way to the bank, the woman caught herself thinking that frankly, she didn't think anything good would come out of her idea. What can they do to help me? I'll still need to pay back the entire amount, and where am I supposed to get it from? Oh, Anthony, how could you do this to me? Veronica thought with anguish. The bank was a busy place, as always, and Veronica was having a hard time finding a free consultant. When Veronica explained her problem to the senior manager, he immediately sent her to the bank manager. Plucking up her courage, the woman knocked on the door and only then went inside. The manager was working on some documents at his desk and looked up at the woman as she came in. At that moment, Veronica caught herself thinking that she had already seen this man before. But when the banker took off his glasses, the woman couldn't contain her surprise. "Floyd, is that really you? I'm Veronica. Do you remember me? From the train station a long time ago." The manager smiled in response and said, "Yes, it's me. Of course I remember you, Veronica. Trust me, I haven't forgotten what happened 20 years ago, and all this time I've been thinking about how I could thank you." Veronica just stood there and couldn't believe her eyes. The once homeless man begging for money for a train ticket was a successful banker now. Having finally overcome her initial shock, the woman sat down across from Floyd and explained her situation. She told him everything about the overdue loan and about Anthony's betrayal. The man patiently listened to Veronica's story and got to thinking. Having made the decision in his mind, Floyd said, "Well, I know how to help you, Veronica. Based on my recommendations, the bank will lower your interest rate and cancel the accumulated debt on overdue payments for these past months. Of course, you will still have to pay off the loan, but it will be much easier to do it this way. At least the amount won't be so bad." At first, Veronica thought that she must have misheard something. What Floyd said seemed too good to be true. Yesterday, she had no idea how to make ends meet, and now she could start a new life with a clear conscience. "Thank you, Floyd. I honestly didn't expect to ever see you again. It's a real miracle," the woman noted, feeling embarrassed. "It's me who should be thanking you, Veronica. It's the boomerang effect at its best. You believed me 20 years ago when I was in a difficult situation. Now I got a chance to repay you. You know, having achieved financial independence, I even opened several centers in the city to help the homeless people. Now I know for sure that good always returns to the one who did it," Floyd answered with a smile. It took Veronica a lot of effort to restrain herself from bursting into tears. Meanwhile, Floyd called his assistant and canceled all appointments for the rest of the day. Then, smiling mysteriously, he invited Veronica to have dinner with him at a restaurant. "We have so much to tell each other that it would simply be stupid to waste time on petty conventions," Floyd said. "So, should I think this as a date?" Veronica asked, matching the manager's playful tone. The banker seemed embarrassed for a moment and then nodded his head in the affirmative. As it turned out a little later, Floyd had already been married and gotten divorced. Now he was single, and there was nothing connecting him with his past life. Taking Veronica by the hand, Floyd led her to the exit, where a limousine was already waiting for them. Veronica looked at her companion with undisguised pride, and for a moment, it seemed to her that she'd become the heroine of a fairy tale about Cinderella. Only unlike the fairy tale, their car won't turn into a pumpkin, nor will their driver turn into a rat.